given this scope, what is possible in terms of exploitation? What are the vulnerabilities? What are the security gaps across that defined scope? Red teaming is a little bit nuanced in that it starts with attack objectives that we also call trophies. So it might be to compromise and exfiltrate employee data, delete a mortgage, make it disappear, make an ATM spill out all of its cash, or do an unauthorized wire transfer to another account, or even plant a listening device in an organization's executive boardroom. All of those are trophies, and many have a lot of different types of pathways, more so than just the network and the traditional network. So some of them might require social engineering people, might require gaining unauthorized access to a facility, pivoting, traversing through a chain of different networks and applications, and through vulnerabilities in the cloud or in applications to reach those different attack objectives. So scope definition still super important with red teams, but it starts with attack objectives, and then you go from there. The other piece of that is the adversary emulation piece, which really kind of underscores the fact that these operations are based on real world attacks by real world adversaries that we are seeking to emulate as closely as possible, so that the organization can answer questions as to whether or not those same attacks could happen to them as well, based on their unique set of controls in their environment. So underscoring the need for red team operations to be based on a foundation of threat intelligence, because if we're seeking to emulate a specific adversary, we better understand them. We better understand their tactics, their techniques, and their procedures. And so that's really kind of at the core of red teaming specifically.
That's excellent. A great fundamental definition. So that is what red teaming is. Moving on to here. Oh, I teased Will Ferrell there in a second. We'll get back to him. These are the fundamental reasons why an organization might elect to dive into the world of red teaming. So first, obviously, justify or perhaps defend additional investment or existing investments. Second being pressure testing current security operations, keep them honest. The third being improve their skills. This is purple teaming. We're going to keep coming back to these core reasons and themes kind of throughout this talk. But I think the more interesting question is, why red teaming now? And this is where we bring in Mr. Will Ferrell. To quote the famous Mugatu from Zoolander, red teaming's really hot right now, Trevin. It's something that we've noticed here at Bishop Fox in our market research in the last 12 months in particular. And you don't have to take our word for it. We have some data backing it up. So as you see here, the kind of Google search trends across North America, that's a clear upswing to the right and to the top there. And then even our own internal marketing metrics that you see here. This is basically an amalgamation of a number of different marketing relevant data points, also a clear trend up. So the first section of this webinar, I think we want to get into, we've got two theories as to the reason why. Why is red teaming in 2023 having a moment? And I'll pass it over to you, Trevin, for theory number one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add that, in addition to the marketing metrics, our own delivery metrics, every metric that we keep internally at Bishop Fox points to customer interest in the red team service line, doubling, even tripling within the past 2 years alone. So we are very carefully and steadily growing our delivery team in order to kind of meet that surge in demand. But as to why, that's a really good question. And my initial thought is just overall growing awareness of red team and its value to security decision makers and all the difficult decisions that they need to make. But I also think we can look at this as more of a function of supply and demand. And so you've got the demand side as a whole. Organizations are looking at all of these current realities in the world that are happening all around us, and they're wanting to be protected against these threats that exist. This isn't anything that's new and sudden. We had year after year of major security related events that affected the world and produced headlines and really raised awareness across populations that maybe previously didn't, consider security significantly. But we had, early on volumetric DDoS attacks during the financial crisis way back then, followed by these waves of critical zero days like Heartbleed and Shellshock and Log4j and WannaCry, Eternal Blue, and those types of things. We had major attacks even recently on software supply chain, where the world witnessed that the compromise of a very commonly used enterprise software provider could result in them being a delivery method to actually deploy malicious footholds on all their thousands of customers that used their software. We have new sophisticated ransomware that's hitting energy and utilities and municipals and manufacturing and school districts and everything else. And all of that was happening. And it didn't just involve, a small cyber criminal group here and a bunch of those, but actual nation states, really well-funded nation states that were behind some of these. And now geopolitically, we've got strife in different parts of the world. We've got Europe with the Ukraine crisis and Southeast Asia, potential conflict there and things like that. And companies and boards are taking very, very seriously their stewardships, and they're asking better and better questions of their security leaders and their security teams. And they're wanting to know, are we prepared? Are we buttoned up against these things, or could we potentially be a target and susceptible to some of these things we read about on a daily basis, it seems now. And they are seeking independent, trusted verification that they are, or where they are most at risk, so that they can prioritize those particular mitigations. And all of that and other factors have resulted in this very heightened interest in offensive security, both building and growing internal capabilities across application pen testing, network pen testing, red teaming, as well as seeking out third parties to partner with to provide those services. So that's the whole demand side. But there's this whole other supply side that I think also has been a trend that has been growing over time. I remember reading there was some recent research done by it was Cybersecurity Ventures that looked at open cybersecurity jobs over like an 8-year period. And they said that we've reached 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs worldwide. And that number is just astonishing to me. 3.5 million, to put it into perspective, this is Super Bowl season. It happens to be happening over here in my neck of the woods in Arizona. That stadium, State Farm Stadium, happens to be holding about 70,000 fans. So imagine 50 of those, and that's the unfilled cybersecurity positions. That is, to me, an enormous deficit and a big number. But on top of that, when we specifically look at red team types of people, I usually look for pretty advanced level of knowledge. These aren't usually people that kind of are stumbling into red team. They've wanted to do it for some time and have been spending many years kind of building that foundation before they can actually do it. So I think the nexus of these two supply and demand trends that have happened over a long period of time is a big part of the reason why red team services are just in such strong demand right now.
Yeah. And just to add another point or a tease for later on in the presentation, we've actually got some data showcasing even how more scarce red team talent is. Underneath the greater narrative, that's pretty well documented of how how far behind we are in terms of filling cybersecurity roles in general. So that what you just covered, Trevin, I think it's safe to say that this is evergreen. This isn't going to necessarily change anytime soon. What I'm going to cover now is more right now at this moment in time. So February 2023. Sure, most of the audience right now has heard, read all the headlines. There's lots of anxiety around a potential recession. Lots of layoffs have started, unfortunately, particularly in the tech space. belt tightening, name your euphemism that you hear on the business news channels. And you have to remember, and I actually like the one in the top right there, in terms of CFOs now have sufficient excuse to restrict tech spend or mandate cuts to it. And why is that important to security? Right now that we're exiting basically a decade-long bull market and entering into more uncertain times. And it's what you see here. So this is the current cybersecurity vendor landscape. Some estimates 3,500, maybe as much as 4,000 vendors. In the bull market of the last 10 years, fueled an explosion of security technologies, specifically services as well, but a lot of the stuff is tech. All kinds of acronyms you might be familiar with, right? SIEM, SOAR, SASE, CASB, WAF, EDR, XDR, etc. You get the picture. One CISO once described it to me as, what alphabet soup do I buy this year, right? In terms of my security investments. So, and it made sense on paper, or security leadership kind of got into the motion of, okay, we're going to layer my defenses with most cutting edge technology, the stuff that's coming out to keep up with the threat landscape. And now we're at the point where the last figure that I saw is that some businesses are operating with 20, 30, maybe even as much as 50 security vendors in their operation. And this creates a few problems. One of them is a well-documented one in the space, like alert fatigue, right? Security teams are often paralyzed by the sheer volume of alerts they get from all these different tools. It's kind of turned security operations into one of those giant, like elastic band balls. This is an analogy that I was thinking through. You think about it, an elastic band, one or two or a couple of them on their own, they've got great utility, right? It was in MacGyver's toolkit after all. But layer them on top of each other more and more and more, the utility of that dwindles, and you're left with, a big desk knickknack, basically, right? And I might be being a little bit too harsh to security tool stacks, but I also don't think it's a stretch to say that this whole dynamic for a lot of organizations is kind of a vulnerability in and of itself, right? So we have now these two problems coming to a head. We have the macroeconomic environment, and then, by the way, we haven't even mentioned, you touched on them in the last slide, Trevin, but like all the kind of classic security challenges, the threat landscape, et cetera. All of this is coming together, and the long and the short of it is there's tons of noise on both the ground level of security, and there's noise at the executive leadership. There's a lot going on, and we're going to go back to Mr. Mugatu here. Everybody, I think everybody can resonate with this at this moment in time, right? We all feel this way, and how do we bring in red teaming to this? So the role that red teaming can play is getting to a baseline source of truth, right? CISOs, CFOs, CEOs in 2023, at this moment in time, they need a sanity check more than ever. Tough decisions lie ahead, and there really is, in the offensive security space, really no other service that's as well positioned to help inform these kind of tough decisions than red teaming. So before we move on, do you have anything to add here, Trevin?
No, to your prior slide, I just saw that vendor matrix a lot early on in my career. New CISOs going to a security conference and kind of looking for maybe inspiration for their security strategy. And rather than attending the tracks and kind of learning that way, they'd go to the vendor area and they would just walk up and down those aisles, listening to pitch after pitch about how this tool, this product is really what you need. And I call that bottom up security strategy. It's starting with more tools and solutions and fitting them in. And sometimes before you even really know what problem you're truly solving, and you end up with this mesh of tools, sometimes redundant and overlapping. And it really just kind of, as you said, creates a lot of complexity. But top-down strategy starts with your company mission, the threat landscape around it, and then the top threats. And it starts with your critical assets, your crown jewels, the pathways to compromise those within your environment, which then drives the needed controls and processes and investments. And it may be a tool, but it may also just be a process change, or it may be a personnel type of a situation there. But red team can play a very important role in a top-down security strategy, and that once you've defined those core elements, those are all fed to a red team, and those scenarios against those critical assets are then played out as accurately as possible, and you get ground truth around how well those existing controls that you have truly did. And you can laser focus on areas that maybe didn't do as well as you thought they would, and may find inefficiencies and even gaps across your people, process, and technology that are used to protect you.
So it's good of us to make the claim that red teaming is, the best kind of service for tough decision making. For this slide, I wanted to get into examples of it in practice and kind of draw on your experience in this space. So let's go around the world here, starting on the top left, starting with the CISO position. Can you think of some examples in your career of using red teaming to make tough decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of looking at this slide, I've been in 3 of these 5 roles: the security operations, red team, and then the CISO role. I have been in security about a couple of decades now. And the first big part of it was really more of the security operations, blue teamer, tools, deployment, monitoring, incident response, forensics side of things. And then the second half was all about building red teams. I built a red team for a couple of major financials, one for American Express, another for Capital One, and then built a red team offensive security program for Symantec, software cybersecurity company there. And then I became a CISO of NortonLifeLock. And it's interesting to me because I feel like I learned more about the true value of red team while being a CISO than from actually while I was building the internal red team programs, those 3 that I had built. And I know that sounds odd, but the perspective is just so very different. Communicating a critical finding during an outbrief, the red team exists to find those things. That's their whole purpose. So to them, it's woohoo, we did our job. But to the recipient, to the CISO sitting across the desk, it's, Houston, we've got a problem. Very, very different perspective. And I came to learn that. But I also came to really love my red team even more as a CISO because they gave me and my company such incredible perspective about how our security program was really functioning. Not just what was being fed to me by dashboards and metrics and different things, but really, when it gets down to it, can we stop the attack or can we not? Were all of the parts that I thought were working together, were they really working together as they were intended? And CISOs, they've got a tough job. They've got an organization to protect with very limited resources. And they need to get buy-in across an organization and things. And so they need to know what battles do you really need to fight and what efforts are worth it and what efforts will truly draw down risk for you and as you're investing your time and energies into this. And the answer to those questions requires an accurate map and picture of the threat landscape as well as the effectiveness of your controls. So as a CISO, I would have special briefings for a board of directors, and they wanted to know. They were reading. They knew it. They were on top of it. They wanted to know, are we buttoned up against these things like ransomware that we're reading about that are impacting even our competitors and people in our same industry? We're worried. Are our investments in time and money being spent on the right things? And I could show them all sorts of different dashboards and vulnerability patching metrics. And this is our coverage of our EDR and our volume of phishing attempts that are blocked by our email gateways. And here's our success rates of our monthly phishing program and all sorts of things. And by the way, we're PCI compliant and SOC 2 and all these things. But after all of that, all of those things really just kind of told me one piece of the overall story, and nothing was satisfying to the board or myself as a CISO than being able to say, we have run ourselves through the paces of a realistic ransomware simulation that is mapped as closely as possible to the real tactics, techniques, and procedures of the real adversaries that want to do us harm. And this is how we fared across all of our collective security posture around that threat scenario. These controls did pretty well. These ones not so well. We're susceptible here, not here. These controls maybe were redundant and not necessary there. So from that, we could find inefficiencies and gaps and prioritize and feel very confident in some of the tough strategic decisions that had to be made around limited resources.
That's awesome. Let's move over to the right now. So security operations, blue team, SOC teams. How can red teaming drive positive outcomes for that function?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I've seen companies that have this naturally incredibly competitive environment between blue and red teams, and while that can be it serves some purposes and be somewhat productive, it can also be really unnecessary and also not take full advantage of what a red team can be. Um, it's not about pointing out where you're bad or not doing well or lack quality. The red team, I say this often, is your sparring partner. It's not them. It's not the red team that's going up against that heavyweight fighter in the championship ring. It is the blue team, and the blue team is who needs to be ready for that and for that bout. And so, but the red team is the ultimate sparring partner because they emulate that fighter as closely as possible, all their techniques, and then they dissect everything openly with that blue team. As opposed to a real adversary, they're not going to tell you this is what we did. Oh, and by the way, you missed these, you may have caught us here, but you missed these other 9 things we did in your network. The red team does exactly that. Hey, we're going to tell you everything, the entire narrative from start to finish and everything we noticed and every way that we can get you stronger. And that's really the point. It's about the blue team. It's about making them as strong as they can possibly be. And so I would say in terms of driving meaningful outcomes for SOC teams, that's not going to happen if there's not a partnership and a realization that really the red team is there to make us as great as we possibly can be. So yeah, I'd say partnership through things like purple teaming and other types of things can absolutely have a positive effect on the SOC's ability to see, detect, and respond properly to things that they're seeing.
What about organizations leveraging outsourced security operations, right? Like not every organization has the luxury of having an internal SOC team. Can red teaming help with that?
It's funny you say that because early on, before I ever even started in red team, I was with a pharmaceutical company that was looking at possibly going with a local MSSP. And, we would have all these meetings with them. We would listen and everything they said sounded amazing to me. But then I thought, hey, if a tree falls, what's the cliche? If they don't see something and if we're not looking for the same thing, how do we know when they've actually missed anything? And I actually never answered that question until I got into red team and the answer to that. And we legitimately have companies that come to us to say, hey, we had a third party come in and do a red team on us, and they found that our MSSP was terrible, and they took it over. So now this red team turned into their ongoing MSSP on their detection side. And now the company's wondering, how do we know if they're good and they're what they say? And so they were looking to us, and we're offensive security only. So we're not looking to gain their defensive security business, but they looked for us to come in, and we actually validated that, hey, you know what? They're doing some really, really great things. We were able to persist in your environment for 3 days though. And here's some things that they can do better. And they're able to kind of work with that and improve that relationship and actually have some feedback as to here's some things that apparently you're missing. So absolutely, there's a part for that.
I think that dovetails into finance pretty well, right? Because finance, they might not know very much about security, but they know it costs a lot of money, right? And I think that's what you just mentioned is a really good example of validating or perhaps shining a light on ROI in terms of security, right? A quality red team exercise can go a long way into either, confirming in the example of a MSSP that they're doing good work for us, or they missed things entirely, and it might be time to shop around for a new provider, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Similar points to with the CISO that they're concerned about is, am I putting all of my resources, my limited resources, in the right areas? All questions that our finance team, hey, are we spending the right amount of money? And our red team can help you understand that and put that through a more accurate lens.
Yeah. Okay, so let's try to tie together some of the themes here. I'm going to role play with you for a little bit. Okay, so uh, I'm a senior executive, not security. Let's just say I'm a CEO. I've got real concerns over ransomware, geopolitical climate, but I also have a hunch that kind of going back to the slide of all the security vendors out there and the alert fatigue, that I think I could consolidate a lot of my or a lot of the enterprise's security technology and save some money because I'm worried about the 2023 recession, et cetera. And I want to put pressure on my CISO here. What's the case for red teaming to me as a senior executive in that scenario?
Right. I think there's a number of ways you can answer that individually on a per solution basis. Each one of them is going to have its own set of metrics that you can point to that, hey, this is working effectively. But very little truly looks at how everything works together through the lens of what you're really trying to protect, which is actual scenarios. If you play that actual scenario, you may find that, hey, this tool that I deployed to serve this exact purpose didn't do that at all. Or maybe we're overestimating the value of a certain tool, like, I don't even want to throw out an example there, but maybe we're thinking that a tool has capabilities that it doesn't really. And there's no better litmus test than to actually do a red team against your operation, against your organization, and determine how you do across that, and what tools are effective, what's doing its job, and maybe what's redundant, and what may be able to help you save money if you because things are being adequately caught at a certain level. You don't necessarily need something at a deeper level.
Good stuff. So now let's assume that you listeners out there, we've sold you. Red teaming is the next project that I want to undertake, and your head's nodding that it can really be a useful service to help inform difficult decisions. Now we've got two pathways that we can go down, right, Trevin? We've got looking to hire or train up existing employees if we have that opportunity, or to look to a vendor to outsource red teaming services to. So let's tackle the first one here, and this is kind of the slide that I mentioned, kind of illuminating the scarcity of red team talent in as a double click into the overall shortage of cybersecurity employees. I know red teaming is your passion. So what do you look for in red teaming talent? And can you share any strategies for organizations to help solve this challenge that we see here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Well, I'm extremely picky. For me, there are softer skills, and I guess more that we'd consider like qualities or attributes, and then there's also technical skills, which also need to be there. But I first and foremost, number one, I'm looking for people who are passionate about their craft, like I am. And I'm from the Southwest, but I was living in Ohio for a few months. And one time my wife and I decided to venture out, and suddenly we found ourselves following like horse-drawn carriages, like these buggies pulled by horses. And we were in Amish country. And it was the most fascinating thing. We don't have that out here in Arizona, to my knowledge. But we had the most amazing lunch at a restaurant. And then we stopped by this old barn that had this sign that said furniture. And I'll never forget the quality of the tables and the shelves and the desks and the armoires and everything that was in there, the cabinets and all of the, just the detail and the fresh cut wood and lacquer. You could smell it. And I was just in awe because, I mean, we were used to this cheap pressboard stuff, right? I mean, we were still fairly newlywed at the time. But we saw this man outside working on a lathe, and that was the craftsman that was doing a lot of this furniture. And And I was just in awe of this quality of work there. And that memory has always stuck with me. I look for people who love their craft, and this is what they want to do. In addition to that, I look for ability to listen and work well with others. After all, this is red teaming. It's not just, putting a single person on an operation. We're working together on these things. So solid communication skills with your teammates as well as with our clients. And, because if you can't write, if you can't communicate, it doesn't matter how great your testing was or what you found, if it doesn't actually reach that final pathway to the client to be able to action it. So that's the soft skill qualities, attributes side of things. But then on the technical side, I get a lot of questions around what learning path, should I pursue to be in red team? And the answer is not so simple, because, in reality, there's a lot of different skill domains that are involved with red team. So skill domains like network, your standard network pen testing and web applications. And then you've got cloud, which is its own world of different technologies and different things. Open source intelligence gathering, the ability to recon information about people, technologies, businesses, and things is a significant skill set. Social engineering, physical operations, the ability to develop and script tools, because there's not always just going to be a tool for everything that you need to do. You need the ability to say, I need to develop something, whether that be a script or something. Exploit development, mobile, wireless. There's a whole bunch of different domains, but the good news is that you don't need to be exceptional at all of them. And that's good news, because it's very, very difficult, next to impossible, to be an expert at all of them. It's why we approach operations as a team, to find somebody with full mastery of one or two of those skill sets, or three or four, and we can combine them with somebody with complementary skill sets, such that if we need somebody to do really deep social engineering, on-site physical, security assessment, and then combine that with some post-exploitation involving network and web applications, we could capture that with two people. And so that's really important, is that you kind of look at your team collectively and make sure that you're covering some of those bases that are most important to your organization. Maybe you don't really have much of an on-site building presence, and so physical operations isn't going to be a skill set that you need, but some of those others may absolutely. So I would just say making sure that the skill sets complement each other, in addition to the soft skills I mentioned.
That's great stuff. So we know that not every organization is going to necessarily have the luxury of building an internal red team, or maybe even if they do, they're still likely going to have to reach out to third-party vendors for work on developing their red team program. So this is some information we collected for this particular scenario. Is there anything that pops out to you here that would be especially helpful for an organization that's looking to evaluate a red team vendor?
Yeah, I'd say the ones that stand out to me are, in particular, that second one that's around customizing, because every organization is just so different. They have different threat concerns. Different businesses have entirely different threat concerns and different attack surfaces. And so while we seek for consistency and quality across specific testing processes, still, there's no two red team operations that are going to happen exactly the same way. They're just combined differently, the smaller pieces together, like blocks, I guess, to create an overall operation there. So each customer environment typically is going to require its own unique approach, and we have to have that ability to be adaptable. So if you get the sense as a customer that you're getting a mass-produced product, then you're going to want to run from that. You're going to want something that's tailored to your specific needs there. At Bishop Fox, particularly before any red team engagement is done, we have a collaborative threat modeling type of exercise that we call architecture and attack graphing, where we try to understand your core technologies. We help you then visualize that, as well as how attackers would go about compromising your environment, and top pathways for achieving specific scenario objectives. So such that even if we do, let's say we come up with 10 of those, but the customer only wants us to kind of really prove out through that red team operation the top 4 of those, they still have a very beneficial attack graph that shows different phases of an attack that can help them to understand, okay, even though the red team didn't do these last 6, we're still going to find benefit from it and action them and work on tooling to prevent against those scenarios. So again, that's one way that we really customize our approach toward each customer. But the other one I'd mention is that number 6 is pretty important around protecting the information obtained. Ultimately, you do not want your offensive security provider to ever cut corners on protecting your environment or to run the risk of actually reducing your security posture ever. So protections on your data, they should be spinning up new attack infrastructure for every different customer, so your data doesn't wind up on the same system and directory structure as another customer is very, very important. You never want to actually introduce risk into your environment through an offensive security firm that's not following proper process or doesn't really have a well-defined rules of engagement process. Beyond that, I would focus on number 4 there around the approach to purple teaming, because it's not just a question of can you support purple teaming, but what is your actual approach on it? I would make sure you really try to delve into that with your provider. It might mean something very different to each provider, and you may not receive what you think you're going to get out of it. So those would be the 3 ones I mentioned.
Yeah, be wary of the us too vendors out there, right? This is a very common thing that happens in security. And if our hunch that we kind of went through at the beginning of the webcast is correct, and that red teaming and purple teaming are gaining steam and notoriety in the overall cybersecurity market, then you can expect a lot of vendors to raise their hand and say, "Oh yeah, we do that too." And obviously, it's not as simple as actually executing a fully fleshed out and properly defined offering. One thing that came to mind as well, Trevin, was one thing we've noticed over the past year here is a lot of organizations are actually reaching out to us and are interested in longer term engagements, establishing a working red team relationship, in contrast to other motions that organizations might be familiar with, you engage a provider, they'll do a red team in 4 to 6 weeks, you get your report, and you go your separate ways after that. What in your mind is the merits of adopting like a strategic longer term red team partner?
Right, absolutely. I kind of alluded to this with the attack graphing there, in that you don't want to go after everything all at one time. Like, you really want to get the most value out of a red team operation. You definitely want to focus it around some very specific scenarios and objectives, and then you're going to leave some for a future date. I would use the example of a bank, for example. I mean, that's the space I came from, and so you have these very complex financial institutions that have retail banks, you have ATMs, you have wire transfer capabilities, you have, you have all sorts of different lines of business that fall within this complex structure. And so if they just kind of reached out to a third party to say, do a red team on us, well, you really want to focus that maybe on one very specific line of business or very specific threat concept around, for example, the wire transfer, if you focus on that. But you're going to then be missing all the rest of your attack surface. And so I would recommend that companies look at that red team strategically, and not just red team, but the other types of things, tabletop and purple team, and think more strategically around how this would fit. So we have customers, for example, that came to us, major mortgage influence in the world, saying, hey, we are very loyal to our vendors. We want to establish a relationship with a offensive security provider that we can trust. And we want to then come back to you quarterly and do multiple operations with you. And it's really about that relationship and of trust that we can build there. And so we're on operation 3 with them, and they continue to come back, and we can customize. If you look at those individualized red team offerings, look at them as building blocks. We can combine them all sorts of different ways. So let's say you may have an interest in maybe 2 red team operations per year, one on our external, the other one focusing on our internal network. And then in addition to that, we really want to laser focus on purple team. We want to help our blue team really kind of strengthen their defenses there. So let's do a quarterly purple team engagement that's 2 weeks each time. Oh, and on top of that, let's do 1 tabletop per year. But all those are different dials. If you wanted to do monthly operations and quarterly, whatever, you could customize a plan that works specifically for you. But what that gives you is you're going to get a team that isn't going to be swapped out every operation. You're going to get resources that kind of come back and that and on a first name basis with. They know your environment, so you're not going to have to re-explain policies, processes, how to do things. You're not going to have to give all that overhead. It's kind of a look and feel of your own internal red team, but working through a third party offensive security firm. So there are a lot of benefits to it. The most of it, though, is that you can think strategically about your environment and then kind of laser focus into very specific test scenarios and cases on an ongoing basis.
That's great stuff. So we are almost at the end of the presentation here. We did want to share with the audience some particularly relevant resources that we have available to download here at Bishop Fox. We've published an ebook on red teaming that obviously, Trevin, you had a huge hand in influencing the content of that. So really valuable stuff here. I'm a big fan of the SANS report that we partnered with and published, because this will really give you a sense of, it's kind of a look behind the curtain and into the heads of red teamers, ethical hackers, and then by extension, real adversaries in terms of how fast they operate, in terms of how often they encounter difficulties in their work. Lots of great content there. So I highly recommend anybody in the audience to reach out and take advantage of these resources. Now it's time for Q&A. I think we've got some questions that have trickled in. So we got time for about 3 here. First things first, why is red teaming more expensive typically than other forms of penetration testing?
Well, yeah, first of all, it is. So there's no perception. It absolutely is from a cost per vulnerability identified perspective. Red team's going to be one of the most expensive forms of offensive security testing that's out there, that's available to you. And that doesn't sound good in terms of wanting to do one, but that's if your focus is on vulnerabilities and on low cost to identify. If that's the case, then red team is not your optimal choice. I'd actually steer you more towards vulnerability assessment or pen testing and those types of things. But again, red team is not about just finding vulnerabilities. Yes, we find them along the way, but it's really more like we're going to traverse all sorts of different technologies in the way that we need to traverse them to get to that next link in the chain so that we can reach our objective. So it's not all about finding all the vulnerabilities. And so something like a pen test where there's really not a detective element as to, hey, you need to be careful to not throw, alerts on our security. That doesn't usually apply with pen testing, but in red teaming, it does. And so a pen test is going to use tooling that is very comprehensive and exhaustive and find all the vulnerabilities and, paths and misconfigurations and really kind of let you know the risk levels of each one of those things. But a red team is going to do things just as an adversary will do them. And they're going to help you to understand how well you stack up against that. And are you preventing certain key aspects that an attacker is doing? Are you forcing them into paths where you have more excellent monitoring? Are you detecting them as they're doing some of those things as well? So where other avenues are heavily identifying, leveraging automation and giving them very comprehensive view of all the vulnerabilities, red teaming is very stealthy and it's not going to be giving you that volume. But all those approaches that we apply in red team they take more time, they take more effort, sometimes require some deep research along the way. That collection of expertise and ability to perform them, all those result in red teams being expensive. But I would say so are actual breaches by many orders of magnitude.
Of course, yeah.
More typically. So the best way to actually see, if you're susceptible to that type of a breach would be to do it through a red team, which would be a fraction of the cost.
Yeah. The one thing I'll add, I think the red team ebook would be a good resource to whoever asked this question. To leverage some of the content in there if you do need to make the case or do some education internally as to why it's fundamentally different than penetration testing and therefore why a bit more of an expensive line item. That could be helpful in terms of championing your cause internally. Next question here. How do I know I'm ready for red teaming versus sticking with more standard penetration testing?
Yeah, I guess dovetailing off of that last question, the good news is that your foundation is maybe going to be less expensive to have underway, but than the actual red team piece there. But I would say we actually do get a lot of customers that come to us and say, "Hey, I would really love a red team," and we actually will say, maybe red team is not the right thing for you at this stage here. We recommend this, this, and this. And sometimes that's not even something we do. But I've just seen too many times where we've gone in and it's just, for lack of a better term, a bloodbath. They just found it was just too much for them to consume. And they would have been better off really focusing on some of the one-on-one types of things. So I would say if you have a solid, consistent vulnerability management program, that you're responding to your scan data, you have maybe some periodic pen testing done maybe as part of PCI or some of those other types of things. If you have a security operations function, again, red teaming is testing detections. If you don't have people really monitoring what's happening in your environment, why are you pursuing a red team, I guess? And so that can be an internal team or an MSSP. Some other things, I think having a decent handle on what's on your perimeter, what's out there. So kind of understanding, as it's changing, do you know when new things are being deployed out on your perimeter, or is it kind of wild, wild west at your organization? So having kind of an accurate inventory of that. If you have a blue team, again, with the actual IR plan, some playbooks maybe, then you're ready for a red team or a purple team, one of those. And I'm sure it would provide a lot of value if you've kind of checked those basic boxes.
Okay, last question here. What do you think about physical security testing post-COVID?
Well, we love to do them. I can tell you that. But and I think for many organizations it makes sense, and it's a real part of our attack surface when COVID hit, and we were all working from home. So many organizations, they kind of deprioritized spend on physical security controls, and over time, those underlying technologies that they used for badging and cameras and monitoring, they may have depreciated, they may have aged a little bit and created some gaps that you don't know actually exist. And so, not only that, but people may not be as trained or used to some of those best practices around checking badges of somebody who's walking in right behind you and tailgating, and kind of doing some of those things, see something, say something type of things. But, I would say, as we start to do return to work, what a great way to put those all to the test and see if you're up to date and see if you have any gaps, against the latest attacks. By the way, attacks have changed. They've even changed in recent years around badge cloning and those types of things. So, see if your people are still following best practices. It'll probably surprise you, the number of gaps that you didn't realize that you had on your physical estate. So I would recommend it if you have a physical presence.
Yeah, I haven't seen any data or research on this, but you would have to think adversaries now more than ever see physical locations as soft targets. I mean, it's only reasonable to assume that physical security has probably, like you mentioned, slipped a little bit post-COVID, less people at the office, even if they are open, that sort of thing. I would have to think that adversaries, unfortunately, are looking at that as an opportunity, right?
Absolutely. And I think we think of adversaries as like some unknown, that wants to get into our building. And that certainly does happen. As a CISO, you would have people show up, customers show up, and things, and you have to know how to deal with that type of a thing. But I would think more along the lines of maybe an employee who has been very disgruntled and has been let go, and maybe they feel like that's unfair, and they want to show up and personally, complain about that type of a thing. That's a pretty potential scenario that you could absolutely see happening. And that's somebody who is not coming in off the street. They may know some things about how processes are done, and when guards are there and when they're not usually, or when cleaning crews are coming in, or like they may have some internal knowledge of, hey, this gate is left open, in your smoke area or something like that. So that would be more the scenario I think would be of concern wanting to be tested out versus just somebody off the street wandering in.
Awesome stuff. Well, thank you very much, Trevin. I hope the audience as well found today's webinar informative and helpful. If you want to learn more about red teaming, what we're about here at Bishop Fox, check out our website, bishopfox.com. Check out the resources that we have available that we spoke about earlier in your webcast console. We'd love to get your feedback at the end of the webcast too. This helps us get a sense of what you liked, what you didn't like, and help produce better content in the future. So please, we would love to have that. Thanks again to everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.